Thanks everybody for joining today on our webinar from Auth0 and Versent, helping Australian organisations navigate customer identity in the AI era. Before we kick off, just a couple of logistical things. We love questions, we love interaction, Eddie and I, so please throw any questions, comments, etc. you might have in the chat. We'll try and monitor that throughout, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A section at the end of the webinar as well. So with that, let's kick off. Firstly, to introduce myself, my name is Matt Porter. I'm lucky enough to lead our amazing team of Auth0 solution engineers here at Okta and Auth0. And I am very, very excited, joined today by Eddie Smith from Versent. Eddie, to have you here. Looking forward to your commentary. Thanks for joining, but maybe first up, we'll just get you to give a quick overview of yourself, your role, and Versent and what you guys do.
Good morning, everyone. Eddie Smith, Chief Identity and Security Officer at Versent. I've been at Versent about 11 and a half years now since we first started and been doing identity since the late 90s, last century, I can actually say now, which is a bit embarrassing. Versent, we're a Apex partner of Okta, and we specialize in customer identity and OAuth-based trust fabrics, and we help our customers deliver solutions in the Okta world.
Awesome. Thanks for joining today, and looking forward to chatting to you throughout the webinar. So with that, let's kick things off. Today's webinar really is all about sharing some insights with you. So we here at Auth0 run a report every year called the Customer Identity Trends Report, and it's our annual report that explores different themes that relate to trust. And really today is about sharing some of that information and data with you, but also sharing some, I guess, practical insights and tips on how you navigate the landscape, and especially in the AI era, things that are affecting your world, and how you can improve and build modern identity solutions to deal with that. The data is anonymized. It's 6,500 different consumers. So we don't do this for just to put it into a report. We use this. We use it to provide insights into the way we direct our product, the way we direct our customers, and where they should be heading. I will share with you at the end, you'll get a QR code to download the full report if you haven't already, so please check that out. So with that, let's kick things off. It would be remiss of us not to start a presentation in this day and age talking about AI. Today's presentation is not all about AI. We'll talk a lot about AI and its impact on modern customer identity. But we will also talk about, the customer at the end of the day, the person at the end of the login box, which is a human. Still super important. But AI is not coming; it's here. So if we think about what's happening in the world of AI, it's scaling faster than ever, as we all probably know. I know from a personal perspective, the amount I'm using AI day in, day out in my life today has, exponentially increased in just the last 12 months alone. If you think about what's happening out there, there's a significant portion of your user base that are already interacting. In fact, 37% are already out there using Gen AI, and the pace is pretty incredible. If you think about ChatGPT, they hit 100 million monthly users faster than any technology in history, which is crazy. But as AI, scales and changes, so do customer expectations. They really want to be thinking more about secure, seamless, and human-centered identity experiences. So, this is a time where you need to be thinking about, how you prepare and take full advantage of it, but also mitigate the risks. Eddie, I know you had an interesting stat around, just the sheer volume and scale and growth of AI.
Yeah, so 2025 is the first year, I think, that bot traffic on the internet overtook human traffic. So we're now at 51% non-human traffic on the internet, and of that, 2/3 of that traffic is bad bots over good bots. And I sort of lump bots into just a general non-human concept with Gen AI or agents at this point. And really, it's just when you think about it, 1/3 of the traffic on the internet is auto-generated and is bad. Has bad intentions. It sort of puts your controls in perspective, or the importance of controls in perspective.
Yeah, I think that's incredible, right? The stat of how much of that is bad traffic, and the risk that puts organizations and individuals at is just phenomenal, right? And that's not going to stop. That's just going to scale. And as much as we're all using AI as consumers, so are the bad guys, even more so than us. So that's not going to change anytime soon. So let's talk a little bit about AI agents and building secure AI agents in this day and age. For those, I'm sure most of you are familiar with an AI agent, what it's about, but making sure, everybody's very clear on what we're talking about. Agents are obviously, agents that execute actions on behalf of users and organizations. They're obviously autonomous, they seek goals, and these days they operate, well beyond simple if and then logic, right? So really, really interesting, and I think critical to what we're talking about today, though, is that typically to fulfill their roles, agents need access to multiple systems and applications. So, the importance of securing and locking down that access is super, super critical. As we've already said, 30% of customers are already using them frequently. And, obviously, companies are now embracing AI agents as an attractive, way to scale superior customer service, reducing costs, etc. So, while they're really, really valuable, they often require sensitive and confidential information as well. And really, that's a key pillar of, one of the key requirements here is how do you build trust when you've got an agent sitting out there that's going to go and access a whole bunch of different systems, potentially privileged information as well sometimes. That's super, super critical to, making sure you can secure that and build trust with your customers. So, as we said, this introduces, a whole range of risks as well. If you think about key areas where we see that things can potentially go wrong, there's a few things. So one's unauthorized data access being a major one, fetching data that the users or an agent should never see, right? That's critical. Imagine, in your own world, interacting or dealing with an AI agent that then dishes up information and you're sitting there wondering, well, why does that actually have access to that information, etc. I think there's also the issue of, stale and overprivileged permissions as well. So, thinking of old roles or tokens that grant AI agents powers that they shouldn't have. As well as that, secrets and credential leakage is another huge concern. And I think weak or coarse-grained authorization. So if your access rules are too broad, any agent might be able to get access to data, again, that it shouldn't have. And then I think as well as that, there's also previous privacy and data leak exposure as well, right? So where personal data leaves secure zones and could end up in the wrong hands, one of the massive risks. And finally, all of that can, result in, major compliance and audit gaps as well. If AI actions aren't properly tied back to the real user of the logged consent, it can make auditing a real nightmare. So Eddie, self-admittedly, you've been in the space for a long time. Some of these challenges are new, but they're not all new, right? So I think AI is bringing a lot of them to the forefront. So what do you think, or what are you seeing as the biggest blockers to organizations having fixed all of the above, well before now?
So I think fundamentally, a lot of our controls are based on human actions, human assumptions, human behaviors, and AI breaks a lot of those. So, we are strong authentication for us equals MFA, something you know, something you have, something you are. That doesn't quite work with an agent anymore because they don't exist, so they can't, and they don't have a biometric, and they're all trained on the same sort of data. So something they know, and they would tend to share information. Also, their motivations are different. They're not really motivated. They're only motivated by their goal, and you can gamify that whole goal system to change their behaviors. So I've got the 7 C's of divergence, as I call them, that I present on, where AI is different to humans. So therefore, our control assumptions are different. So while we can use the same controls and technologies, we have to use them in different ways. And I think things like moving from, MFA as a concept to authority, provenance, expiration as concepts in authentication, right? So it's what can you do, what area you operate in, and how quickly that expires. So giving things more temporal aspects, and really it's moving to things like exact privilege from least privilege. So it's really tightening down, because fundamentally it's our controls are designed for a couple of billion humans on the planet. We'd be lucky if we had that many customers, but when we look at where we're going with agents, I think Salesforce expect to have 27 billion operating on behalf of people and customers, etc., by the end of next year. So that's just a little bit of a kick up, and that's not going to slow down anytime soon, just because of the hype around this. So it really is that scale. And if you get something wrong, the blast radius, it's like comparing a hand grenade to a nuclear bomb, right? Humans, the hand grenade. AI, just because it can spawn itself and operate significantly faster. It can be in multiple places at once with concurrent actions. It's just able to do so much more damage, either accidentally or intentionally, so much quicker than a human. So I think they're sorts of some of the things that people are struggling with. Is how do they take these existing controls, morph them to what we need to do to just cater for this different type of user, which has got very, very different interactions and behaviors and control avoidance, so to speak. Yeah, it's an agent doesn't have a concept of consequence, for example, right? You can't give it an extra CPU as a reward or shut it down. It's a very different paradigm.
Yeah, I think you touched on a couple of key points there. One is you can't treat an agent as a human. There's a totally different type of user context. I think as well. I love, and we spoke about this the other day. I love your term of exact privilege versus least privileged. I think that's super critical. As we move forward into how this scales. Right, to your point, totally different scale problem. Let's talk about some specific Australian data. So one of the great things about the trends report that we run is there is very specific Australian data, and we're going to jump into some of that now and look at how Aussies think about this. So funnily enough, in this day and age, there's still 74% of Australians today saying that they still prefer a human over an AI agent. And the big reason for that's really a lack of trust. So, I know on a personal aspect, I still have, issues in some contexts using agents. And there's a few specific reasons behind that, which we're going to drill into now if you think about, some of the data as well. So nearly a quarter of Aussie users are ghosting, AI and not using it. And there's a couple of key pillars, that are really driving that. And the first one of that is, first and foremost, it's around personal data. So in Australia, 54% of those who wouldn't use AI, they're saying it's basically because they don't trust AI agents with personal data. So that's actually 10% higher than the global average. So we're a bit of an untrusting bunch, which is not a bad thing. And second, there's really concerns around reliability. So in Australia, 39% expressed doubts around whether agents will perform accurately or consistently. I'm sure we've all had the personal experience of AI hallucinating or not providing us the right answers in every scenario. And that therefore, I know personally that affects my trust in certain scenarios around whether, I trust AI for that particular task. And for that reason, 46% of people prefer to complete tasks manually rather than rely on AI as well. These are not just little concerns, right? These are major blockers to adoption and engagement. You can go and build the best agent in the world with all the capabilities, as secure as you need it to be, but it's going to fall flat. If users don't have confidence in its security and its handling of the data and reliability, it's not going to work. So no surprise there that, we go back to the previous slide where we're saying that, ultimately 74% of people still aren't wanting to use this stuff, day in, day out. So what do we do? How do we fix some of these trust issues? And how do we make sure security is paramount right from the first get-go? And really that's around, if you're building agents, how do we secure those, right from the start? There's really 4 key pillars here. So that we need to think about. One is obviously authentication. So making sure, everything that you implement strong, seamless authentication to reliably conform user identity before AI agent accesses or makes critical decisions. The second one is calling APIs. So, this demands robust identity controls for how AI agents interact with your APIs as well. We mentioned earlier on about, the breadth of apps and systems that these agents are going to need to access. So making sure you can securely vault, manage and rotate those agent access tokens, things like not hard coding them, etc., are all super important. The third one is really async user confirmation. So you're going to have AI tasks that are not just finite tasks, they're going to run over time. And enabling just-in-time authentication and authorization is super critical for that as well. Eddie might even call that exact privilege potentially. Re-verify user intent as they go through. Where there's delayed actions, you need to make sure that you're not, avoiding leaving sessions open, et cetera, and things like that as well. And then fourthly, authorization, critically, I'm talking here about least privilege. Eddie's talking about exact privilege, but making sure that AI agents only have the minimum necessary permissions for their tasks. So things like utilizing fine-grained authorization and dynamically updating those permissions as well is going to be super important as we move forward and scale. Eddie, I know you wanted to add on to this because you've got a view that doesn't disagree, probably augments this to make it scale in the long term.
Yeah, look, if we look at the more modern protocols that we're seeing, so MCP, A2A, that are specific for agents, that will then publish the APIs, because the API is a tool that would then be available via MCP, for example. It's fundamentally those standards are building themselves on OAuth. So OAuth is critical to securing these different interactions. But when we start to look at some of the things, it's kind of like, how do we shift our identity management in inverted commas as far left as possible, because having a human in the loop when the agent suddenly spawns 4,000 of itself suddenly doesn't scale, or I'm going to get prompted. I'm going to get that not just beyond MFA fatigue. I'm going to get agent authorization fatigue, and I've got another moniker there I use, Matt, that I call null trust instead of zero trust for agents, right? So the concept of trust has to cease to exist, right? We have to literally authenticate, validate, authorize every single interaction and create that cryptographic relationship between the agent and the server, and sharing keys and things like that is just a recipe for disaster with agents. So it's giving them exactly what they need, but giving them to them as early as possible so they don't see a need to try and avoid the controls that we've created for them. But it's building on top of that by creating that cryptographic relationship between the client and the server, or the agent and the resource. And how we do that, like with things like Spiffy and Spire, with things like verifiable credentials and verifiable presentations, private key JOTs, whatever those different capabilities are, it's how we leverage those and get them to the agent as early as possible. So the agent can also use those and understands the constraints its credentials operate in to sort of give it those guardrails of actions.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you for adding on to that. I think for me, Keys, thinking about this right from the start, right before the whole horse bolts. To your point, Salesforce is going to have 27 billion of these running around.
Yeah. And Gartner say 40% of all projects are going to fail by 2028, predominantly due to value, money, or risk, right? So the fact that risk made the top 3 reasons for failing with basically finance-based reasons shows how important and critical it is, I think. And getting it right from day one.
Yeah,
or setting yourself up to get it right, because it's going to scale, but the hockey stick is going to be brutal.
Yeah, as we've seen, even by just general uptake in Gen AI over the last 12 months, right? It's just going to get exponentially more ridiculous. If we move beyond AI, so we've spoken a lot about AI. I said today we're not going to forget the humans in this, the customers at the end of the day. There's everyday threats that can derail any digital experience, and that's super critical for us to think about as well. So if you think about securing customer authentication, it's no longer optional. And, the days of the basic login box are gone. If you think about digital identities and are central to accessing, countless apps and services shaping, think about our own personal lives and how many apps, you've logged in to probably this morning. There's obviously a lot of value to that, but where there's value, there's threats and there's risk. Cybercrimes these days are seeing login systems absolutely as prime targets. And there's a huge growing black market of tools and services out there as well. So, as well as that, attacks are rising across all industries. And therefore we need advanced defenses, right? So it's not just about, authentication, it's about strong authentication, authorization, and SIAM are really crucial to maintaining trust, security, and privacy. I go back to mentioning that word trust. Without it, you have nothing with your customers. And Eddie spoke before about, the number of bad bots that are out there. One of the most persistent challenges in securing authentication begins at the front door, and that's around fake signups. So if we start to think about that and how ready your organization is for that, we're often seeing that fake accounts are outnumbering the real ones. And this is data that we can actually draw this data from some of our Auth0 customers in the platform, right? Again, we have access to be able to see, traffic, et cetera, and what's happening. And it's pretty telling that, during sustained attacks, we can see 120x fraudulent number of signups to one real one, which is insane. It's a huge number. And even if you look at overall, 46% of registration attempts on the platform, on Auth0 platform, meet the criteria of a sign-up attack. So back to Eddie's, stat of over half, we're seeing even on the Auth0 platform alone that people are attacking, and we're seeing 46% of traffic. And if you think about it as well, there's definitely some industries that are more susceptible to it than others. So, retail and e-commerce, financial services, and this is all Australian data, by the way. are more susceptible, than anyone, which is probably not surprising. So if you think about that, how ready, is your organization and how you're dealing with that today? It's pretty critical. One way to do it, and one thing that can help is, and again, we're not talking about AI agents anymore, we're talking about the human element, is really around strengthening MFA, and upgrading, to stop attacks. So, there's a whole lot that goes into this, and we'll talk through a few key pillars for you to all think about. I'm sure some of you out there are doing this really, really well today, and there's others that have probably got some step change and improvements they can make. MFA, by the way, on its own is not a silver bullet. Attackers still abuse it. They still get around it, but there's clear strategy you can make it use to make it more resilient as well, right? So firstly, implement your authentication properly. So gaps or workarounds, things like if you've got admin that can bypass MFA, etc., that's going to get exploited. Don't do it. Secondly, use strong factors. So this is critical. We've spoken about the move away from passwords to passwordless passkeys, etc., but prioritize authenticators based on possession of biometrics. So fingerprint, facial scans, etc. These are a lot harder to get around. We talk about phishing resistant MFA. This is how we do it. And third, leverage adaptive MFA. When we talk about adaptive MFA, what we're talking about there is assessing the risk at each login and only prompting for additional verification when you need it. Right? Don't prompt every single time. But if we see a high risk, then that's where we can prompt for a step up and making sure the user proves who they are. And finally, I've already spoken about it, but embracing new MFA methods that are more secure and convenient. Biometrics are a great example that we just mentioned earlier. If you focus on these, you can significantly reduce the risk of MFA abuse. Interestingly enough, and this is an interesting stat though, and this is an Australian stat, 46% of users in Australia indicate that they'll enable two-factor authentication where possible. I would expect that would be significantly higher. I think, Eddie, you're surprised it was so low as well. What do you say it should be?
It should be 99%, right? It's just yeah. I'm unusual, I guess. I'm in the 46%, but yeah, I love using my MFA everywhere.
Yeah. Funnily enough, we're actually higher than the rest of the world. The rest of the world's at 39%. Global is the global average. So we do it more. But one of the interesting things that's coming out, and again, being an Aussie probably doesn't surprise me, is that we're a little bit lazy, Eddie. So we're security savvy, but definitely more selective. We do things like reuse passwords, etc. So we might go and enable MFA, but we're still doing things like, reusing existing passwords because it's convenient, right? It's easy for us, so we do it. As well as that, I think, another key takeaway, is we've got a higher baseline of trust in companies, and we're going to look at some of these stats in a minute. And we've already spoken about some of those, AI adoption headwinds with concerns around misuse, reliability, etc. Eddie, what are you seeing? You're out there dealing with clients all the time. If we think about the headwinds around AI in particular, are customers in a position to be thinking about agents? If not, what's stopping them?
A lot of customers are still trying to deal with humans, let alone AI, and get the human interactions right. But it's those bad actors that we talk about, and really what's on the minds of a lot of people is identity verification and how much data they keep at the moment, right? So creating those honeypots of information, but it's a fundamental change to their business processes to only gather what they need, for example. So it's how they do identity verification to make sure they are getting the right humans signed up without needing to gather a lot of those data, and things like Connect ID, Agnes Text, the age verification things that are coming along are going to provide good frameworks. So we'll all have mobile driver's licenses in wallets in a couple of years that we can use for some of these things, and they have selective disclosure with remote presentation, right? And that, I think, will give us some tools that we can then use to change and tackle a lot of the verification, but it also provides a way of enabling those more modern authentication methods that you talk about, right? So people are nervous. What if I lose access to my passkey? What if I lose access to this? How does the customer get back in? And MFA is only as strong as its weakest enrollment process. So we end up falling back to an email that doesn't have MFA enabled. So there's those sorts of daisy chains that people are problematic. I did love your comment about risk detection and only triggering when. You can actually get rid of authentication if you've authenticated someone once and you've properly authenticated, and then you just monitor them with behavioral analytics.
Yeah.
It just makes for a much, much smoother experience. But really, it's still those fundamentals that people are dealing with. How do I get rid of those SMS-based authentications? How do I verify the user without providing a horrible form that I have to fill in? And it's just,
Yeah.
I think the technologies are coming and the standards are already here to move a lot of those frictional barriers. But at the moment, because we don't want to get yet another dropout, we tend to lower the barrier to entry and we lower those controls. And, we end up with 120 fake signups for one, so to speak. And it's just finding that right balance between not creating too big a door for people to walk through or lock for people to get through, but also not exposing ourselves or our users to some of those issues that we've discussed so far. Right. I know that if I don't need to sign up, I won't buy, and someone's asking for extra information, I'll just go back to someone like Amazon and get it somewhere else. Right? So it's just, I will take the path of least resistance and use an existing account if I can, but asking for my date of birth to send me a pair of socks, it's just ludicrous, right? So it's.
Yeah. I agree. I think that I see a lot of that with customers as well. I think the friction between secure identity experiences versus the customer experience and barrier to entry, etc. Which is and again, I think my advice to people is don't let that be a blocker and stopping your tracks. You need to be thinking about it and strategizing and coming up with a plan, right? I know we're very short on time, so very quickly, just around some of these statistics from an Australian perspective as well, which are interesting. We've already spoken about the two-factor or MFA that will do it. 59% of our customers trust companies to keep their information secure. Eddie, very, very quickly, this one's super interesting given the range of breaches, etc. This has gone up. Why do we trust companies more now?
That's one I just couldn't understand, right? And maybe it's because our data's already out there. What's the worst that could happen now, right? So it's I sort of joked with one of the breaches. A friend was a CISO there, and he said the attackers were so quick; they're in and out before they realized it. And he said we've just lost several million things. And I said, but is it several million new identities, or is it really only 7 new identities and several million people have already been breached in the other attacks? So I think we've just been breached so much that. But it's how short are our memories is probably the thing that struck me about that one, right? It's that we now trust people to. Nothing's changed. Why do we trust people more? Maybe it's just good marketing from companies.
Yeah, I agree. It's It was an interesting one for me as well. I'm surprised. I would have thought that would have gone down. Third and fourth, so 54% do not trust how their data is being used by AI agents.
I find that ironic as well because 85% of companies are using AI, yet we trust them more, yet we don't trust the AI.
Yeah, we don't trust them. People are super conflicted and confused at the moment based on the data anyway. And I think one that'll become more critical, as you said, over the next couple of years as well, is, as digital wallet, etc., comes to the forefront. At the moment, only 32% of Aussie customers rate government issued digital IDs as being convenient and easy to use. I would expect to see that go up over the next few years.
My gut feel is because people are used to using it, but it's not interoperable yet. You can't take your New South Wales license to Queensland and vice versa because, New South Wales is a VC, Queensland's an ISO, and it's just they're not compatibility. There's a lot of work going on in that space, and you can now use your Queensland license in New Zealand before you can use it in New South Wales, but you still can't use it in New York to hire a car. So I think once that interoperability happens over the next year or two, then I think that'll skyrocket.
Yeah. Agreed. We're almost at time. Thank you all for joining. We're a little bit of Q&A. I know we're a little bit over time, but for those that can stay on, I'm going to throw this one to you, Eddie. The first question from Monty is, in the context of AI agents, what does authentication really mean?
Yeah, and look, as I said, that can't be something they know, something they have, and I sort of invented another one, which I think I got wrong, embarrassingly, but it's authority, purpose, and expiration. So we need to prove their authority, which is basically the authentication part. And then we go to purpose. But that authority also includes a chain of trust, right? Where they're coming from. And we need to be able to see that who they're operating on behalf, where their delegation is. So it's not just authentication anymore. I completely agree, Monty. But then it's their purpose. What are they exactly authorized to do? And then expiration. An agent doesn't need a credential that lasts 30 days. They need one that lasts 30 milliseconds. So it's going from, no, have, are to authority, purpose, expiration, or as I call it, APE as an authentication mechanism, which I found ironic, but it works well.
Yeah, good one. Great answer. Thank you. The other couple of questions we had, which were pre-submitted ones, I think we kind of answered anyway. We're talking about that conflict of, between things like customer marketing, for example, and the security team and how we blend that, making the door to, or the barrier to entry not too high. I think we addressed some of that as we went through the presentation as well. So we'll park that one. And we will wrap things up. Look, as you can see by the stats, and even what I'm sure you're experiencing in your own world, AI is changing things super rapidly. I think there's never been a more important time to think about, not only your customers, but also thinking about these non-human identities. And as Eddie said, treat them as two doors to entry, but two very, very different use cases and how you handle them as well. So, this is not a world where this is going to go away. As Eddie mentioned earlier on, the hockey stick is going to be real. So we need to prepare for that now, and stop, attacks and breaches, and be right at the forefront of that. I really appreciate everybody joining today. Hopefully that's given you some, valuable stats, valuable insights into what we're seeing and what our customers are seeing, and giving you some valuable advice. And Eddie, thanks for all your tips and tricks. I'm sure you'd be happy to speak to anybody on the webinar in more detail. Eddie,
Eddie loves talking
identity all day long. So appreciate your insights, Eddie, and taking the time to join as well.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you all. There's another couple of questions there that we might take asynchronously, but thank you all for joining and participation. Appreciate the time today. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.